Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
At the end of 2018, we almost went bankrupt. We had $7K in the bank account at the beginning of September with an $80K monthly outflow. I wasn't sleeping very much. It was very stressful. It was pretty horrible. And I got into the launch accelerator. I pitched 7 to 9 VCs per week, VCs and angels and like mid growth level for 12 weeks. So there are about 100 investors in person and 100% of them said no. So we never got to raise, which made it kind of hard, but we ended up getting pretty scrappy. We killed a lot of other apps we were thinking of doing at the time to just focus on payments and events.
That was Chris Federspiel, the CEO of Blackthorn.io, and he is our special guest on this episode 165 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Myers. Chris has laid out a truly impressive foundation for his company, fueled by skill, passion, ingenuity, and a tremendous amount of grit. Blackthorn.io has multiple apps within the Salesforce ecosystem that cater to payments, events, messaging, and commerce. The company started back in 2015. Chris says the best way to think about them is as a middleware that connects their customers from Salesforce to multiple other gateways. Their market share is concentrated in the higher education, nonprofit, and healthcare verticals, with their target audience being any organization within the Salesforce ecosystem that needs to move money. Chris and I also talk about his journey to being the CEO, as well as where he sees the industry going in the next 2 to 3 years, including a massive consolidation and saturation of the API-based payment clones. We've got a great episode ahead, so let's get started. Hi, Chris. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Yeah, Greg, thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, just some of those high-level things, and we'll jump into your background and career specifically in a few minutes.
Sure. Moved around a bit when I was younger. I grew up outside of Philadelphia in the suburbs, moved to Westchester, New York, then to Central Jersey, school in DC at George Washington. I got my start doing computer stuff when I was in late middle school, early high school, doing some Perl and CGI forms, some website stuff for a nearby internet service provider, and then got into the Salesforce platform in early 2011, which then began my foray into payments.
And where are you currently living now?
I'm currently in Manhattan, in Union Square.
Awesome. Well, let's jump in and talk about the company Blackthorn.io. Can you tell our audience what the company does?
Yes, we have apps on the Salesforce.com platform. So if you go to the App Exchange and you install apps into your Salesforce instance, that's where our applications are. And we focus on processing payments, doing events. So if you think of like Eventbrite or Cvent, but living inside of Salesforce as your registration platform, and also by doing messaging, like text messaging.
Which one came first?
Payments came first with the intent to do events because when you do an event, you have to have a checkout. Even free events have a set of checkout logic. So the logic and the payment layer live inside of the payments app. So it looks like they're two different apps, but they really work together.
And maybe explain to the audience sort of the Salesforce kind of ecosystem, how it works. If you know, like how many companies have it, kind of give us kind of an overview of the space.
Sure. So Salesforce has a little over 20% market share, I believe, of the global CRM, customer relationship management deployment. So for them, I've heard numbers of anywhere between 100,000 and 150,000 businesses or organizations. There's a lot of nonprofits too using the Salesforce platform. And in the App Exchange, they've now reached 10 million, they call them installs. They're not quite downloads. You just pick an app and it drops into your Salesforce environment.
What is sort of the marketing strategy? How do you reach out to these Salesforce users?
It's a weird space. So Salesforce made this amazing flexible platform, but there's no guided path. So most companies that buy Salesforce, they use an SI, a system integrator, People are familiar with Deloitte and Accenture, but there's also like Coastal Cloud and Cloud for Good and a lot of these companies that have hundreds of employees to install the applications and configure the applications inside of their environments. These customers tell the system integrators, hey, we want to do payments. Hey, we're interested in doing event registrations outside of Salesforce. And we found this thing on the Salesforce App Exchange, or the partner will say, I would recommend this thing from the Salesforce App Exchange. The needs that we're serving, they're served outside of Salesforce, but once people buy Salesforce, they look to centralize all of their functionality within Salesforce because it all uses the same system of record. Like, Greg, if you take a higher ed, for example, we work with a lot of higher eds. Let's say that you wanted to explore the business school and you went on a tour there. And then the school wanted to send you a text message. And then later down the path, you ended up going to one of their alumni events and you paid for a ticket. All of those interactions with our app stack would all live under Greg. So the reason that these higher ed and Salesforce using organizations look for applications like ours is because it centralizes all the information in one place.
And you mentioned higher ed as a vertical. Are there other verticals that you focus on?
Yeah, so it's different for the different apps. So with our events app, we focus on higher ed, nonprofits, and healthcare, not on purpose, just because they're the ones that really wanted to use it. So then we ended up targeting them with everything that we built. For payments, it's more infrastructure related. We don't have a clustering of revenue or number of customers across any vertical. We have tech companies, insurance companies, random companies that need to take a payment. There's a lot of nonprofits. If you think about what types of organizations need to move money, it's almost everyone.
Within the Salesforce ecosystem, what is the model like? Is it like, do you guys on the payment side charge a SaaS fee or any kind of hosting fee, or is it truly kind of like transaction fees only?
In the payment space at large, everybody makes money from transactions, but within the application layer on Salesforce, you can think of us as middleware because we're not the processor and we're not the gateway. We allow people to process between Salesforce and lots of gateways. Stripe, Authorize.net, Spreedly, CashNet. There's quite a few. So the way that we charge and the way that our competitors charge as well is all charging by user. So if your organization has 500 people, but 50 of them in the organization need to do something with payments, do a charge, run reports, access the data, do refunds, we would charge those 50 per user fee on an annual basis to use the functionality of our app.
Are you actually onboarding clients or no?
So it depends. Our app, starting from scratch, can be live in about a half an hour, but we tend to work with all of the organizations to walk them through our app based upon their use cases. Because some customer use cases might want to use Stripe billing with our integration there. Some might want to do mobile payments with a card reader. Some might want to build a custom UI within Salesforce that's using our REST API. So we end up having conversations with customers to walk them through their different technical approaches.
And then is it limited to certain countries or is it a global solution?
We're limited by where Salesforce has a presence and where the gateways support their own either hosting or can take a payment from. So there's some countries that Salesforce doesn't operate in, so we're limited to where they are, but it's most countries in the world.
And so today you have those distinct apps. Is the future to build more apps with payments being a kind of centralized component of it?
Correct. We have one more app on the way for commerce, which is exactly what you think it is. You create a store and you buy stuff from the store. But we're initially focusing on higher ed and nonprofit where they need to sell courses, either for continuing or executive education. So you list your courses, you add them to a cart, and you do a checkout. And then I'll use our same existing payment rails we have in place.
And is subscription, is that a big component of what you do as well?
So subscription amongst gateways and general terminology can mean two things. It can be like a gym membership where it's $50 a month and you get an email that says we charge you $50, or it's a donation, $25 a month. And sometimes that's referred to as a subscription. We have that functionality built into the app using our own logic. You can use any of our gateways to work with that logic. And some people use that. Then there's a more structured subscription. If you think of ChargeBee, Zuora, Chargeify, or Stripe Billing, we have that functionality as well. That's like a multi-line invoice, upgrade, downgrade, prorate kind of functionality. So we have customers that are using both different approaches based upon the complexity of their business.
And how old is the company?
We started August 2015, but we really didn't start making money until mid 2019. We looked a lot more like a services company until then. We still had something like 400K in earlier 2019 of annually recurring revenue of ARR.
So 2019 was right before the pandemic. How did things look for you guys during the pandemic?
It was interesting. We had about a full year of normalcy. And then when the pandemic hit, we'd never focused on Zoom, WebEx, GoToWebinar integrations. But once it happened, everyone immediately wanted all of those. So we never built something where you could navigate in and out of sessions and do chats like a lot of the big virtual platforms did that really took off. But we also didn't have much attrition. We had, I think, 5 companies that stopped working with us. 3 of them went completely out of business, so we had no control over that. And then 2 completely stopped having events, either virtual or in person. So we actually didn't lose anyone due to functionality of our application. And then we just continued to grow at a 100% year over year pace. So we're at almost 9 million ARR now from the 400K-ish beginning of 2019. So COVID was strange. During March, we received no leads. March 2020, I can tell you as someone that pays salaries, that was pretty scary. But I think it's mostly because the world didn't really know what was happening and people didn't know what their next move would be. And then things started to come back after then. Payments continued to sell because you don't have an organization unless you can do charges. And so that really continued. And then events, once people learned that you could do these virtual events using Zoom or other platforms, then they just wanted it integrated and they wanted a really good registration solution because all the webinar platforms with their registrations are really simple. Like you can't do dynamic pricing or dynamic member, non-member visibility. You can't easily do things like custom questions. You can't map the custom questions onto your contact record. There's too much import export. There's a lot of reasons why people wanted to use our app and then couple it with a webinar solution.
So as a marketing guy, I'm always interested in trends. Are you seeing more in-person events than you are, with the virtual events? Are you seeing that shift happen?
So it's a question I get asked often, and I am always a little embarrassed to say I'm not exactly sure what types of events people are doing. Because at the end of the day, the way our app works is a bit unique from non-Salesforce apps. When someone installs the app, we actually don't know exactly how someone's using the app because we don't have the same degree of access to like product level metrics that people have. Like there's no amplitude or mix panel or something like that running in the application. So what happens then is that we get a lot of feedback from people based on requests. So I'll tell you that based upon user requests, we're now again starting to get feature requests for we have an organizer check-in app. You show up at the door, you scan a barcode, you can swipe people in, you can add someone to the registration right from your phone and whatnot. So we started to get more of those feature requests. And now we've started to get a bit more requests for our mobile attendee app that we're building. But we are still getting a lot of the virtual requests where we have this live events module that's coming and there's still a lot of interest there. So without giving you this information by data, because we don't have the data, it seems generally that things are hybrid now. There's just as many in-person happening as there are virtual happening.
Well, it sounds like either way, you're still seeing a lot of demand.
Yeah, we're still seeing demand. It's not like things have skyrocketed, and it's also not like they've dropped off. It just continues to be the same because at the end of the day, an organization needs to reach their audience somehow. So they need some method. People just refer to that as an event. Like you have some way that you can network and you have some way to distribute information. And people are finding ways to do that with our application using in-person or remote.
Well, what would you say differentiates your company from your competitors out there?
We have a bit more unique approach to go-to-market. So within Salesforce, we have a number of payments competitors. We have a number of events competitors. We have a number of messaging competitors, and we'll have a number of commerce competitors. We have 0 competitors who are doing even 3 out of these 4. So at most, any of our competitors will do 2 out of these 4, but generally it's usually only 1 out of 4. So when we work with an organization, we provide a unique value add that you can then consolidate 4 vendors, 4 systems of record, 4 IT reviews, 4 contracts that you have to manage into just one system, one set of support, one onboarding. It makes it a lot easier for companies to then be able to operate. I think that's evolved into something that's been more unique. In a Salesforce realm, when you download an app to your phone, you just open it and it's really easy to use. That concept doesn't really exist in enterprise software, but particularly on Salesforce. Things take a very long time to set up and configure. Our goal has been to get all of our apps live in, I would love it to be like 15 minutes. It tends to be 30 minutes to an hour based upon who's setting it up. But most of our competitors take 20 to 40 hours in order to configure and use their application, which is, that's like forever. So something unique about our stuff is that it actually gets going pretty quickly. And we spun up this thing that we call Candy Shop. It's candyshop.blackthorn.io. The concept is to script and automate the install and configuration of the apps to make it even faster. These kind of little things all add up to our competitive advantage, I guess. It's fast to install and configure. We offer multiple apps across the platform, and we're doing them in a way that tends to be a bit easier than the competitors.
What about on the service side? Are you the customer service, or does it have to go through some Salesforce kind of thing first?
It's a bit subjective and a bit objective. When you build automation on the platform using a flow or an Apex trigger or these unique Salesforce technologies that interact with our application or any app, and you run into a bug, it could be because of logic that someone put in a Salesforce platform feature, like a validation rule that's blocking their thing from happening, but they might think it's our fault because it's interacting with our app, but it ends up being something on the platform. The same thing can happen with us. They'll think it's something weird with Salesforce, but it could be a bug that we're causing. So what tends to happen is that when these support cases come in, we have to log into people's Salesforce environments and then run some kind of tests with them to then see how they're doing the operation, look at any error files and so forth. So the support requests that we get tend to not be very simple. So we refer people to documentation for basic things, of course. But when people start writing automation, it then takes us some time to help them understand if they need to contact Salesforce support or if it's something that's with us.
Well, where do you see, and you can answer this sort of in the context of your business and apps that you have, but where do you see the industry heading in the next, say, 2 to 3 years?
Consolidation. We've had a number of private equity companies approach us to buy us to do these roll-ups where they buy all these companies that are processing payments and push them to their own payment processor. And then if you look at companies like Visa picking up CyberSource, and I think they picked up Plaid, or maybe that almost happened, or CyberSource picked up Authorize.net, there's just going to be a lot more of this consolidation because there can't be 50 Stripes in the world, right? And then these companies are also starting to build each other's products. Like Stripe just launched effectively a Plaid clone yesterday. And Square has now started to do enterprise API-based payments, right? And then there's a lot of these API-based payment clones starting in countries where there hasn't been development yet. So there's been a few that come out of Nigeria, a few different ones across Africa. And I think what we're going to just see more of is a lot more of these clone API companies springing up, and then a lot of acquisitions from the bigger ones picking up the smaller ones, like Chase picking up WePay or I think that was the name of it. I think we'll start to see a lot more of this. Then longer term, I think what we'll see is if you look at Uber and Lyft, there used to be Via and 3 other ones. I can't even remember their name now, but now there's just Uber and Lyft. And I think eventually some of the companies will die out, or enough market share will be taken from them. And like the one-click checkouts, right? Like forget what happened with Fast, who knows? But now there's a lot of competition that Bolt has, where Stripe's trying to get into the market, and even Bolt has a few different competitors there too. So there can't be 10 winners. So eventually there's either going to be buyouts or the companies will just fail in the longer term. So I think shorter term, there'll be more consolidation that we'll see over the next 3-4 years, particularly with the recession now. It's being referred to as like a consumer recession, I guess eventually. We'll see if payments start going down. If you look at the providers like Square, they're not getting these huge multiples that they had before, like Shopify. And if Shopify's valuation and then processing goes down, so does Stripe, because Stripe more or less relies on Shopify and vice versa for like humongous amount of their processing. So I'm getting, I guess, off on a tangent a bit, but I guess in the shorter term, consolidation. On the longer term meaning like 10 years, beyond that, it's a completely different thing. But much more of this larger scale consolidation where we'll start to see some clear big ones start to evolve. Like Adyen's quietly started to take over a lot of market share. They're processing a ton, but in terms of people even knowing they exist, it's only people really in the payment space that know they exist. But now Stripe is becoming more of a name that people hear. We'll have to see what happens to the Square and Stripes and Adyen's and PayPal's of the world.
You're definitely onto something there. And I always like to bring up crypto as a topic when we're talking about the future. Are you seeing or hearing of any demand to be able to do things with cryptocurrency in your business today?
It's an interesting thing. Inside of our company, it sounds really sexy to have a Salesforce app that does crypto payments. The reality is none of our business customers are doing anything or have any desire to do crypto payments. It's only the ones that work with consumers that want to do the crypto payments, like a nonprofit wanting to take a crypto donation. If we do, there's enough API services to just tie into our Rails. Like the effort to add them in is, 4 months or something. Like it's not some huge build we would have to do. And I think that if the demand gets there, there's enough API services existing for all of the middleware type companies like ours to wrap them in relatively quickly. But for B2B payments, we haven't seen it at all. Like I don't know of any business owners that I'm friends with that are doing anything with holding any of their funds or accepting funds as crypto, unless they're doing something with a consumer in a particular type of market. Like I don't know of any of us that are working with Central South America where they're starting to get more crypto adoption, but we'll have to see. I personally would love to see more crypto adoption. I think it's a great way to give governments competition. And I think that's a very good thing. And I also would love to see microfinance and microlending try to start internationally, and a way to get people funds into countries where it's very hard to do using real cash, instead using very simple smartphone or even text-based Bitcoin or some other type of crypto transaction. I think that would be great to see.
I think your sentiment around cryptos is pretty similar to what I've heard is, it's kind of a sexy word and a lot of people think it's cool, but then, you peel the onion back and what's really there, what demand is really there from real customers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sort of the challenge a lot of people have run into, I think.
Yep, exactly.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit, if you don't mind, and talk about you. So tell us about your journey, maybe from where you mentioned in your early days starting until your role today as the CEO there.
Sure. When I was young, I wrote code and I was never good at it. I always got really frustrated when I hit bugs, and my friends were better at coming up with algorithms and doing things with many less lines of code. I always enjoyed the part where you had to replace your operating system. I played with lots of different Unix and Linux structures and then Windows NT and whatnot. So fast forward to when Salesforce came out, it allowed someone like myself that enjoyed computers, that could understand architectures, but just couldn't write code, to then start to get dangerous. So Salesforce allows you to write database schemas with your mouse. And you could say it's sort of cheating and it's not really developing. But if you think about how an architecture needs to occur, that happens without having to write code. Unless you have a good plan, you can't write code without that occurring. So in early 2011, I got a job at Internet Creations, and I started by selling and by doing the work after I sold. So I was selling their Salesforce.com apps, which were for support departments to process inbound emails that would create cases. And then they would do a lot of logic around what would happen when the case is created. And we had to implement the application for some pretty big companies, like for Honeywell and for Carfax, and a lot of pretty big deployments then. And they got really complicated based upon if you wanted to calculate on business rules, or if you wanted to route the cases to different users, or if you had different response rules, or what was happening when you stripped the headers of the email. And there were just a lot of interesting tech or computer concepts that didn't involve writing code. And it just became addictive to me. And I loved the platform and getting the inside out of it. And I was there for 2 years. I went to Silverline and did selling there, but I was always more on the scoping side of the project rather than on the sales. I was there for a year and a half. Then I started my own consulting company, and I figured if I could sell 10K of projects a month, I can cover all my expenses and be happy and on my way. And it started to take off, and partner with another guy, hired a bunch of people. And I was just delivering all the projects that I sold. And eventually the opportunity came along to do a product company where implementing these other payments apps, I saw some gaps in the space of things I wanted to do differently. At the time, there was also no Stripe integration. So we started working on this Stripe integration application and thinking about how to make it really easy based upon other stuff out there we've seen. And that ended up being the first thing that we released. And we ran with that for the first 2.5 years, 3 years, until we eventually launched the events application.
So you have co-founders there in that business with you?
I had co-founders until mid 2018. Then we parted ways, and now it's just me running the company.
Have you taken any investment money?
I tried. At the end of 2018, we almost went bankrupt. We had $7K in the bank account at the beginning of September with an $80K monthly outflow. I wasn't sleeping very much. It was very stressful. It was pretty horrible. And I got into the launch accelerator. I pitched 7 to 9 VCs per week, VCs and angels and like mid growth level for 12 weeks. So there are about 100 investors in person, and 100% of them said no. So we never got to raise, which made it kind of hard, but we ended up getting pretty scrappy. We killed a lot of other apps we were thinking of doing at the time to just focus on payments and events. And we found that events was the one that people were most willing to pay for, and it provided us a vertical to go after. Payments in itself is pretty hard because it is a infrastructure play. It's hard to target a specific vertical with a go-to-market versus doing events. If you can put all of your marketing towards one particular vertical and one use case, then it ends up being a bit easier. So fast forward to now, we still haven't done any kind of VC raise. I have 68% of the company. Employees have 20% of the company. And then some early friends and family helped us out when we almost died.
Well, you have a little bit of a unique story in that you haven't raised money, but it's not a bad one, that's for sure.
I'll say this, if I ever do another software company, I'm definitely raising money because or at least trying to again, because the stress of not having money is pretty horrible. It's really a pretty terrible stress. Different people deal with situations, on their own terms, and emotionally, when there's a bank account with not that much money and I have to pay salaries, it was really painful.
But you made it through.
Here we are.
Awesome. So what are some things you're passionate about? So maybe one work-related passion and one personal passion.
With work, I love trying to make existing things better. This concept of how to use our events app, for example, our payments app is very technical. People that come to it, they're admins, they know how to automate stuff. Our event users are coming from Eventbrite, and they don't really know how to use Salesforce. An initial event wizard that missed the mark. It functionally works fine, but it didn't get great adoption. So now we scrapped it, and we have a new one coming out in a few months. And that's been fun to try to figure out what the new dynamics are. Personally, I was very fortunate, just got a lake house, something I wanted for like 10 years. And I spend the majority of my time riding my bicycle up there. So I'm very into triathlon stuff. I do a lot of running, swimming, biking, dividing up my time with my fiance and the triathlon. That ends up being the bulk of my life.
I always like to ask this last question to get different people's opinions, but as you know, payments has been pretty hot topic. Add fintech in there. Many years ago, it wasn't. It was, the bricks on the table, swiping cards, and now obviously it's much, much different than that. So, kids coming out of college these days can look at the fintech or payment space and say, hey, there's a lot of cool companies to work for. I think I'm going to go into this industry and try to build a career. What kind of advice would you give someone coming out of college, looking at maybe their first job or maybe transferring from another company into this space? What would you tell them they should do to be successful?
I really like this company, Replit, that helps you to do a lot of things, but I think of them as like a Google Docs for writing code. Like multiple people can work on writing your code together. It has autocomplete. It has advanced testing. It has all these different things, right? And there's something like 10 million users that are using Replit. You can say that you have to go to high school and get a general education, and then the first 2 years of college are still a bit of a general education before you pick what you want to do. And I would say for anyone that wants to go into payments, you need to learn as much about computers as you can before going into something like payments. And that doesn't mean to become a developer. It means to at least just understand development concepts. And Replit is giving a path for a lot of people to do that. But then you also have to be a bit forward or future thinking because, as you said, if payments were brick and mortar before and now they're happening via API, what's going to be after that? So try to pick, if you're joining a company, try to pick a company that you think is doing things differently and moving very fast. It's a space that's evolving very, very quickly. Every 2 or so years, it seems like there's something brand new that needs to be modeled, and most companies are getting left behind. I think eventually something needs to change with the monetary system, which would be the new change in how payments get processed. Could be something crypto related. I'm not quite sure what it would be, but the way that it's occurring, and I think looking at the trends, I would say try to understand computers and writing some basic code first. Take a look at all the different payment companies that are out there, not just one that might give you a job offer, and see which one that you think has some lasting power. Or if you just want to do something for a year, it's quite easy to switch between companies now. There's some overwhelming number of job openings and such a small market of people that understand this space at all.
Yeah, I love the way you framed that. It's kind of like, not too long ago it was brick and mortar and now it's all API, but what's next, right? So if you go learn about what there is today, like you said, in a couple of years, it's going to be something totally different. So I really like the way you framed that. That's really an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, everything has some degree of shift. Every 20 years, the technology behind something completely changes. So we'll see what occurs. I mean, these API-based things, minimally, there's 5 more years of how this thing is happening now. It's just being way too heavily and massively adopted right now, and it's still just continuing to grow really fast. But then after that, we'll just have to see.
Yeah, we will. So, Chris, we've covered a lot of ground on you and your background and the company and what you're doing there, and a little bit about the future of the industry. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Good luck and don't run out of money.
Good at there's no better advice than that, right? What's the best way for people to learn more about the company?
It's just blackthorn.io. And if anyone has any questions for me, I'm always happy to answer anything. It's just chris@blackthorn.io.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you being on the show. I know you're very busy. So again, thank you for being here.
For sure. Greg, thanks so much.
Absolutely. And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.